Hey guys, welcome back to another voiceover breakdown. This week we are looking at a single leg X pass in the gi. This is sort of a backstep variation that I learned from a couple of the Mendez brothers students a couple of years ago, and something that I've been experimenting with on and off since then. And I have a slightly different approach to passing this than some other people that use this type of pass, and I'll get into that in a second. But let's go ahead and break things down here, okay? So in the first slide, which is probably pretty obvious, is anytime I approach passing any guard, I think it's really important to get your balance and your posture set, okay? I definitely don't want to be stiff-legged and hinging over at my hips in a weak posture, especially with something like single leg X, where a simple hip twist from your opponent can really just put you on your butt right away, okay? So pretty simply here, I'm just getting a nice low squat and a good sort of 45-degree angle in my back. I almost want to feel like I could support weight on a squat rack right now, like if I had weight on my back. I don't want to be in a position where I'm falling forward or falling backwards. I want to be nice and square and athletic and ready to move. So basically pretty simple here. We're just looking at setting our feet and getting good posture before we actually start to attack, okay? The next thing is something that I've been playing with a lot here, where I say establish grips and compression. This may seem a little bit different from the other variations of passing single leg X. What a lot of people like to do is really extend their base out wide and almost turn sideways as they try to drive their trap knee across their opponent's hip/chest. The only issue I have with that is I find whenever I turn sideways, I have short legs, and I find that the wider I spread my legs and my base, and the more I turn sideways, the easier I tend to get swept. I just don't feel like I have good stability and balance, and so I prefer to at least initially address passing single leg X more in this split squat stance that you're seeing here, okay? I find for me, again, at least initially, it gives me better stability, posture, and balance to address getting grips and removing that foot from my hip, and then I like to turn the corner. Of course, there's a bit of a trade-off when you're standing this way because my right leg is very clearly within his reach, okay? So that's something that you have to be aware of right off the hop with this sweep. And that's why I say that you need to compress your opponent here, okay? So I'm not merely just grabbing his lapels, or his collars, I should say, and sort of pulling him into me. I need to make this position incredibly uncomfortable for my opponent. And you might ask, well, why? I want to pull him into my knee so it's very difficult for him to breathe, and it really breaks his posture. I want both his shoulder blades off the mat, and while I was actually drilling this with my partner here, he was sort of wincing and in pain and having a hard time breathing, and that's unfortunately exactly the effect I'm going for, okay? If I'm relaxed here and simply pull him kind of lazily, he could easily grab my legs and extend his hips and knock me right straight back on my butt, okay? So the key is that I have to be kind of aggressive with the way that I pull him into me here, okay? Because when he's pulled in very aggressively, it really limits his mobility, it really limits his ability to generate offense. In fact, the way I'm pulling him in here, even if he grabbed my pant leg, he doesn't really have enough mobility to really effectively extend his hips and off-balance me, okay? And this isn't a position I'm going to sit here for, 10 minutes. This is dynamic, and it's going to happen quickly, but I just want to highlight that it's really important if you're going to stand in a split squat like this, that you make sure that you really compress your opponent into you, or you're going to get swept pretty easily, okay? So just a little caveat here to be aware of, okay? But it's hard to tell from this angle, but this should really be uncomfortable for your opponent, okay? So I'm taking those collar grips, I'm really pulling, I'm really making it hard on his diaphragm for him to breathe, and it's really going to limit his offense, okay? The other thing that this does, as we move through the slide here, is that by compressing him this way, it makes the foot on my hip incredibly weak, okay? So when I say clear the foot, I'm actually just using my elbow here, okay? Because what I've done is I've pulled his shoulder blades up off the mat. He's less mobile. His body is not able to extend. And that foot that's in my hip, his right foot, it's now really hard for him to sort of keep any meaningful distance between us, okay? So basically, I'm folding him in half almost, and his foot just sort of starts to become very weak, and it's really not that hard for me to sort of just dig in with my elbow and remove it. And you'll notice that as much as possible, I'm trying to keep this double collar grip the whole time while I'm doing this, okay? I don't want to necessarily let go and allow him more mobility to then sweep me, okay? I'm still in the danger zone here, potentially with my right leg close to his hand. So it's really important, again, that I use my elbow and I drive that foot off while maintaining that compression force, okay? So we'll take a look at that from another angle in a second, but now is where I really turn the corner, okay? This is kind of the initial sort of entry that a lot of people use in this style of single leg X pass, okay? But I don't like to turn the corner, so to speak, or go in this sort of linear fashion until I've gotten his foot off of my hip, okay? The other reason I don't like to do it right away, especially with my foot on the hip, is that it's not very hard for him then to either scoop under and achieve X guard if my leg is not positioned properly. And let's say, for example, a reap was in play, okay? Which I know it's not in the gi, but hypothetically speaking, if I just left my leg there with his foot on my hip, he could easily reap across my body and really start to sweep and drive me away, okay? So again, I like to eliminate the hip from his foot from my hip and then turn the corner, okay? So what this does is it allows me to really get nice and low and tight to his body, okay? You'll see that his right foot is no longer a barrier between my hips and sort of his hips. So I now sweep my right leg back, and I'm going to use that foot and plant it as a driving leg, okay? Because what I want to do is use that back leg to start to drive my knee into his chest. Again, this is a pressure style of pass, so I don't want to be, it's not about speed here. It's about compression and pressure, okay? So I really want to drive off that base leg and drive my left knee into sort of his chest and sternum, again, making it uncomfortable. The other thing I like to do is, if I can, frame across his neck with my left hand there and sort of push his head down, because I don't want him to just be able to freely move from side to side here either, okay? So I generally try to frame under his neck so that if he were to try to sit up, for example, or extend his body, my forearm, the blade of my forearm, would be digging into his throat, okay? So a lot of little things going on here, but this angle now and turning the corner with the foot off the hip is a very dominant position, okay? The other reason I like to drive my weight in and sit low here is because I'm crushing his inside left hook, okay? That's still a threat in this position. So if I were to sort of start to lighten up here and lift my base, even though his foot is off my hip, he could still potentially stomp on the ground with his right foot and use that inside hook to off-balance me. But because I'm squatting so low and crushing that hook, it's really difficult for him to get any sort of meaningful pressure with it, okay? So we'll keep moving along here. And now, before I backstep, it's really critical that you use what I call a V-grip on his inside hook, okay? A lot of people like to grab the pants here, and that's not terrible, but again, I find that when I grab the pant leg, his shin and his ankle have a lot more mobility, okay? So the problem with that is that it allows him some leverage to still bump me off my base, okay? So what I try to do is take this V-grip, almost like a no-gi style grip, and I'm going to drive it right down at the end of the lever, almost trying to crush his heel into his butt, because I don't want him to be able to extend that hook, especially as I backstep. Because if I don't crush that hook, as soon as I go to backstep, he could follow me with that hook and knock me off balance, come up on top, sweep, etc. Okay, so it's really important that you C-clamp at the end of the lever, right where his ankle kind of meets his shin, and then I base out with my left hand in preparation of backstepping. So I like to base out because now I can really drive all my weight forward onto his chest, and it will make my right leg nice and light so that I can achieve a nice high backstep when I do go to pass here, okay? So we'll keep it moving along here. You'll see I backstep. So I like to we end in this reverse neon belly position. And so it's important to, as you backstep, try to backstep relatively high, because if you go low and sweep around his body, that foot that we remove from our hip, it could still potentially block the backstep, okay? So we always have to be weary of where that right leg is of his, okay? Because if you don't account for it, he could follow you with it. So again, try to achieve a lot of weight on him so that your leg is light and you can get a really high backstep, okay? Again, the other thing I'm doing here is, as I drive, a lot of weight is in his chest, okay? You'll see in the other angle that my opponent's, or my training partner's face he's in discomfort, okay? And that's the point. I'm trying to keep him pinned to the ground and make this uncomfortable, okay? You'll also notice, too, as I backstep, I have that C-clamp on his leg all the way to the point where I stabilize in reverse knee on belly. I don't just let go of that quickly, okay? That's a potentially problematic leg, so I always like to keep that C-clamp until I feel like I've stabilized, okay? So in this variation here, I just sort of slide off into a reverse side control. There's a lot of different variations of how you can end this pass. It just depends on what you like. I do like to try to end in that reverse side, because then I like to pull his top leg to me and potentially set up a mount, etc. Okay, so we're looking at it from another angle here. We get that nice compression. And in this slide, this is where I really start to highlight, about making things uncomfortable and breaking his posture, okay? You can see how his body alignment is not optimal here, okay? His knee is almost making contact with his shoulder near his face. That's a very weak position for him to be in, because as you could see here, he'd have to extend his hips in a meaningful way in order to sweep me on my butt. And the other key point about bringing both his shoulder blades off the mat is that he really doesn't have anything to drive off of if he were to try to put me on my back. He'd have to go flat and use the push of his right leg and drive off his back and shoulder blades to really push me forward, okay? So by keeping his shoulder blades off the mat, it makes him far less mobile, far less dynamic, and far less explosive, okay? And you can see how his heel here is, now it's kind of close to my elbow, so really all I have to do is swim in with my elbow here, that I'll do in a second, and you can see that I just knock it off there quickly. Now, I'll stop it here just before we continue, because it's important that as I remove the hook with my elbow, the elbow stays tight to my body, okay? I don't want to just remove his foot and then get lazy and open up, because he could easily repummel his foot right back on my hip, okay? So I keep everything tight here. I still have those grips, and my elbow is still tight to my side so that he can't simply swim his heel around and reestablish that position, okay? Now that I have this position, now I feel better about letting go of those double collar grips and proceeding to turn the corner and sort of plant my base in preparation of backstepping. The other point that's really, really important here, and I find a lot of people miss this, is as you go to backstep, I was sort of mentioning this earlier, but you see how my shoelaces, my instep is tucked tight to his hip/side. The reason I do this is because if that slides off, your opponent could underhook it and start to find ways into X-guard. He could potentially reap over my knee, all these sorts of things. So I want to keep that leg out of danger, and so I make sure everything's tucked nice and tight to his body so there's no space for him to launch any offense. The other thing you'll see in this slide too here is my opponent's face. He is feeling the brunt of my weight driving into him, okay? And I wasn't even trying to do this in a malicious way. It's just, even just a bit of chest pressure is really uncomfortable, but that's very important, okay? I don't want to let him off the hook here. I don't want to give him space and take my weight off of him. This is a point at which I really need that weight driving into him, okay? So we move along here and we're getting ready to backstep. And you can see as I freeze the frame here, you can see what I was talking about with his right leg, okay? You need to make sure that you clear over that leg, because if you don't, he could block the backstep, potentially take your back or counter you. So it's really important that you're aware of where his right leg is, and you make sure you're basing and driving enough body weight onto him so that you can then elevate your leg in the highest way possible while still staying balanced, okay? That way you'll clear the leg, and now once you come down onto that leg and you base, now you've finished the pass, and you're in a much better position to either score your points or move into a different version of side control that you prefer. So those are the points, guys. I think it's a really cool pass. Again, I think in playing with it a little bit, you might find that in experimenting with this, if your compression isn't strong enough, you might get swept onto your butt. They might have enough leverage to drive you onto your butt, and that's fine. You're going to fail with this a little bit. It's become a sweep that I feel really good about, and I have a ton of success with against a lot of good people. The surprise on their face a little bit when you really compress them and they're super uncomfortable and can't move is shows that the technique is really difficult to escape once you've applied it. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the technique this week. If you like these videos, please leave a comment below. Please subscribe, like, and share. Please leave any comments if you want to see any future techniques. I'd be happy to try to accommodate any requests. I hope you got something out of this, guys. I hope you liked the video, and I'll see you in the next one.